Hello there. So I've been out here at the bench all day, all afternoon, working on the top of the guitar that I'm currently building. But I want to talk to you about the tools that I use because you really don't need a whole lot of tools to do almost anything when it comes to hand tools. Yes, there are specialized tools that do things a lot easier, but if you have a saw and you have chisels and you have planes or a plane, a decent plane, you can do pretty much any joint that's involved with furniture making and things like that. So I want to show you my tool setup so that you'll see what it is that I use. There are things in this box I don't always use, but they are what I consider kind of essential for what I do. I do have a couple of old specialty planes that one was given to me and the other was really cheap because I had to repair it kind of deal. So, they are what they are, but they will do the things that I need them for. But if I didn't have them, I could do it with a saw and a chisel. So I want to show you my box and the tools that are in it. What this is an old Craftsman home tool storage. I think it's from the 80s. It's kind of like what your mechanic has on the top of his big box kind of deal. It closes up, but all the drawers are accessible with the lid closed. It doesn't lock. It has these bars that slide in front here, and you close the lid down and you can put a lock on it and nobody can get into anything. This was designed for, this type of design is used a lot in mechanics that work for a living in there and they don't have their own shop. They work in another guy's shop and there's a bunch of people around. That way they can lock up their tools and they would be safe. Now, I plan to build a wooden toolbox as soon as I can get the wood. It'll be a bit lighter than this metal box and probably a bit smaller because there really aren't that many tools in this box. The top box I have chisel hammer and assembly hammer and a couple of marking gauges. This is a standard marking gauge. This is a marking gauge plus mortise gauge so that I can cut mortises, mark mortises, and then of course a claw hammer because you're pretty much going to end up needing one of those. And then I have a chisel roll, and it's just all of my chisels in it. And in order to close the box, I don't roll it up. I just fold it over like this and do that number. And it works just fine. In the top drawer, left small drawer, I have screwdrivers and a spare handle for smaller tools. Phillips and flathead, which is all I pretty much need. And then I have files to file and sharpen my joinery saws, and pencils, pen, marker, that kind of deal. Over here I have paraffin wax for the saw plates, plane soles, a saw set, some punches, a bunch of different saw nuts from old saws, and coping saw blades. And here I have a couple of scrapers, cabinet scrapers. I'm not going to pull that one out, but a jig for chisels and plane blades to sharpen with. I'd use this about once a year to restore the 25-degree bevel on my chisels and my plane blades because when I sharpen freehand, generally I'll get a bit of a camber on the blade, which is no problem, but every now and then you want to go back to a 25-degree bevel, and that will let me do that. I have a small plane that I use in lutherie. This is a Gramo. It cuts binding channels and purfling channels in lutherie for guitars, mandolins, that kind of thing. This is, I don't know what this was before, but I turned it into like a little cutting tool, scraping tool, because I don't have a 1/8 chisel, and I seriously need one for lutherie, a 3mm chisel. And then I have a couple of fret crowning files. I don't use them as much anymore. I tend to like to use a 3-corner file now, and a small Zona razor file, saw. Over here I have a fretting hammer and a little, I guess this is a tack hammer, but I use it as a plane adjustment hammer. And then sharpening, my diamond plate, 400 and 1000 grit diamond plate, and a 1000, 6000 King Waterstone. I only use the 6000, I use 1K on this. And then some green compound chromium oxide crayon. This is, you can get this online, you can get it at Harbor Freight. You can probably get it at the big box stores, and of course a strap for strapping planes and chisels. And in this drawer I have my joinery saws. Veritas dovetail saw. This is a pride of my collection. I love this saw. This is a cross-cut back saw similar to a small carcass saw. This is my small tenon saw. It's a Diston plate from like 1950s, and there was this, it had a Diston saw nut, but that saw nut was aluminum, and it looked cheap, and I did not like it. I put a really nice walnut handle on it, and I was like, nah, not putting that back on. So this is a warranted Superior, but this saw is a Diston. I just didn't want it to look like, I didn't want to put an old Diston thing on it because I didn't want people to think it was an old Diston saw, because it's not. It's a 50s Diston. But anyway, and then this is my fret saw. I don't use Japanese saws except for this. This is a Screaming Good fret saw for cutting the slots for the frets in the fretboard of a guitar. This is marking and measuring, a pair of magnifying glasses, scratch awl, a couple of squares, combination squares, a 12-inch rule. That's a very old rule. 6-inch rule, a couple of sets of dividers. These are old. They have the little piece broken off. I'd like to buy another decent set of dividers, but they're expensive, and these work just fine. So, Stanley 25-foot tape, sliding T-bevel, marking knife, and digital calipers. And then in the bottom, my planes. My Stanley number 5, which is the only plane I need for, the only standard like bench plane type deal that I need for woodworking of any kind. I have an old rabbiting plane that a friend of mine who is no longer alive gave me. He also, I said I bought this when he repaired it earlier in the video, but I did not. This was also given to me by him. Anyway, that's for cutting rabbits. And this is a 1/4 inch grooving plane, old wooden grooving plane for cutting grooves for like drawer boxes, or if you're going to put any kind of bottom in something, you can use this, and a 1/4 inch piece of wood or plywood, or you could take and bevel the edges until the bevel fit in that groove and that kind of. But in my opinion, this right here and probably this grooving plane are the most used planes in this box, or the most useful. And then I have a little beading tool. It's just a screw and a piece of wood, and I took a file and filed the top of it till this edge was sharp, and I can take it and lay it along the edge of a piece of wood and cut a bead there if I want to. And lastly, a spoke shave. Well worth having as well. But that's all the tools in this box. With those tools, I can do pretty much anything I want. But there is at least one more tool that you need. And that's a good 22, 24, or 26 inch long rip saw, panel saw. Either a rip saw or a crosscut saw. I know that people recommend a crosscut saw because when you're going to use that saw to break down long boards, and usually you're going to break them down to length, and you're going to cut across a grain to do that. And you can rip, which means you're going to stand the board on its end and rip down the grain. With a crosscut saw, it's just not as fast as a rip cut. Ideally, I would suggest that you have a rip cut and a crosscut panel saw. They're not in this box because they're bigger than this box. I could cut down a couple of saws. I have one saw that I cut down that would fit in this box, but it's not anywhere near the quality of the Diston or the Atkins saw that I use for breaking down stock, and it's just right here in the house. They're just right here in the house. I can carry this toolbox out here and have every tool I need except for those two saws. And if I'm going to be breaking down stock, starting a new project, I can go back in and get those two saws. And I've got everything that I need to work with. I don't have to stop and go back in the house or anything like that. So this is pretty much all that you need to build furniture. And honestly, you could take and buy like a decent dovetail saw, or a decent carcass saw, or even just a decent small tenon saw, and you could just use one saw and it would work for everything, because the teeth are small enough on these saws that you can cross cut and rip cut, and they will work either way. You'll get a decent finish that you can clean up on a shooting board, okay, and go to town and work. So you could just buy one good saw like this, one good joinery saw. And I would suggest something like this. It's got like a 3-inch depth of plate, or 3/8 or something like that. It's 11 inches long, 10, 11 inches long. It's a tenon saw. It's a rip cut saw. This saw, I think, has 12 teeth per inch. And it would work for everything that you need starting out, because I know that tools can get expensive. But this is a restored saw. I paid $1 for the saw plate on this saw, because I bought the whole saw for $1 and used it with the handle that was on it for a while. And then I thought, well, I'll just make a handle for it, a nice handle that fits my hand. If I'm going to use it, I'm going to just go ahead and make a nice handle. So, I mean, you don't need a whole lot of stuff in order to build with hand tools. You don't need a big, huge shop. You see me, I work out and back. That's it. That's all that I need to do pretty much anything I want. Bless you. I'll talk to you later.